So welcome everybody. It is 12 noon Eastern time. Welcome to our Kuso International webinar. I will give you just a few seconds to log in and we'll start momentarily. Thank you all for joining us today from across Canada and around the world. My name is Tina and I'll be facilitating. While everybody's logging in, I will just start off with a little bit of housekeeping. As you'll see on your screen, we have live interpretation in French, Spanish, and English. And I'll give you a moment just to connect to the right language of your choice. I also invite you to use the Q&A box. That is an opportunity for you to engage with us, and we love when you do. That engagement will kind of feed down to our speakers at the end during our Q&A session. So please use the Q&A box if you'd like your question to be considered for our speakers towards the end. And with that, I would like to start off by doing a land acknowledgement from where I am in Toronto, and recognize that tomorrow, September 30th, marks the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. The day honors the children who never returned home and survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. Public commemoration of the tragic and painful history and ongoing impacts of residential schools is a vital component of the reconciliation process. Land acknowledgements are a common practice in civic and community spaces across Canada. They are a small step towards reconciliation. For non-Indigenous Canadians, it's an opportunity to reflect on the impacts of colonialism and to be accountable to Indigenous people. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. A dish with one spoon was often mentioned by Indigenous peoples while making treaties with one another to avoid violent conflict. The dish represents the land that is to be shared peacefully, and the spoon represents the individuals living on and using the resources of the land in a spirit of mutual cooperation. And at this time, if you know the territory from which you reside, I invite you to put that in the chat. I also encourage us all to engage and learn. And to know more, you can find resources on our Government of Canada's website. Cuso International. Who are we? What are we? What do we do? Cuso International is an international cooperation and development organization that works to create economic and social opportunities for marginalized groups. Together with our partners, that's our model, we are focused on efforts to advance gender equality and social inclusion, improve economic resilience, and deliver progress on climate action. We believe that by sharing skills, we can build better futures. We were founded in 1961, quite some time ago. Cuso International, currently we're working in the continent of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as in Canada. And here on the screen, you'll note that I have SDG 2, which is representing zero hunger of the global goals, or United Global SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason why is because today's conversation will focus on various stresses in food systems, outcomes of the pandemic, supply chain troubles, and food inflation. And this has been particularly hard on marginalized communities in Lima, Peru. By some estimates, it has set the country back its poverty reduction efforts by 10 years. And shortly we'll get into how women and women's networks are responding through a very innovative program called Women United for Food and Environmental Security. And there's a Spanish name for that if you're interpreting in Spanish, you'll hear it's much more eloquent than the English word. And we have expert speakers with us today. Those speakers are Tanya Shepard, Director of Programs, Strategy and Innovation. Tanya has worked in international development within the sector for 20 years. She has direct experience working in Bolivia, Brazil, and Chile with a focus on working in community-based development, women's rights and participation, and youth economic empowerment. She has strong project design and management experience overseeing the implementation of large bilateral projects in Latin America and the Caribbean, financed through Global Affairs Canada, the European Union, and the World Food Program. So Tanya is no stranger to town halls. If you want to just unmute yourself and say a quick hello, Tanya.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here again.
We also have another veteran to our town halls, Pilar Garcia. She has over 18 years of experience in international development programs and interaction with local multinational stakeholders. Her capacities are with large projects, human resources, and volunteer management, in which she has developed partnerships and led programs on gender equality, economic opportunities for women and youth, sexual and reproductive health. She has worked in Nicaragua, Honduras, Colombia, and Peru. Pilar has a deep understanding of the region and the world's development context and enjoys working in multicultural settings. She has a bachelor's in law and a master's degree in international development. Pilar, if you'd unmute yourself and say hello.
Buenos días. Hello from Lima, Peru. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. And when we put these together, I think my excitement couldn't be contained. It's wonderful. It's through your surveys and your action. So thank you for filling out those surveys. We have Griselda Kangachi, who's a community member, and that's what you've asked for, to hear directly from the people within country of who we are serving. So Griselda's here, and she's the president of the community.
Buenos días con todos, agradeciendo su visita.
Griselda is the Community Kitchen's Mujeres Luchadoras president, and she's also a community member of the Women United for Food and Environmental Security. And she's joining us from her home in Peru. So thank you for letting us into your home. I know it wasn't, you've got other things to do. And I think we just heard a rooster, a chicken in the background. So we couldn't get more real than that. So with that, I would like to start us off with a poll just to get some context as to how this particular subject matter affects you personally. Are you seeing a poll on your screen? Here we go. There we go. Now you should see it. So it's asking you about your own personal relationship with food and being food secure. I'll leave this up for a couple of seconds. And it's very interesting. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So everyone's coming in from a different point of view. So I think this topic and this theme will be very interesting for everyone to find out methods and ways of potentially mitigating food insecurity. I would like to bring Tanya to the stage to start us off. And Tanya is going to talk to us a little bit about the pressing issue from a global context, the emerging trends, and more so Kuso's related work in the area of food security. So Tanya, you have the microphone.
Thank you very much, Tina. Good morning and buenos dias. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Tina, and the opportunity to join today's discussion on food security, as well as Cuso International's and our partners' work in this area. When we think about it, food is essential for the survival of people, regardless of your social or economic class, ethnicity, gender identity, and/or your geographic location. Food is what nourishes us, so we need food to get out of bed in the morning. It's what gives us energy. It's what enables us to learn. So I think of children learning in a classroom or adults learning online. Food also stems personal growth. So I think of children growing into healthy adults. And food also fuels productivity. We need to be healthy and fueled with food to do our job, to earn money, to feed our families and feed ourselves. I don't know if everybody thinks about food as basic survival, considering many people do not have to worry about where their food comes from. They don't worry about how they're going to buy their food. They don't worry about how they're going to grow their food, or they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. In its simplest form, food security is about having regular and reliable access to food that is safe and nutritious. We know that this is not true for everyone, as we have seen an increase in global hunger in recent years, despite the fact that food production is doubling over the past 3 decades. I was carrying out some research when I was invited to participate in the town hall, and I came across an article that stated by June 2022, it was estimated that 690 million people were dangerously hungry. That is something I think most people do not think about because they have regular access to food. I myself, for example, have never been dangerously hungry. The Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO, states that over the course of the year in 2019, 2 billion people, or 25.9% of the global population, experienced hunger or did not have access to nutritious and sufficient food. That's a very large number. It's hard to wrap your head around that when you look at the statistics. Food security is further impacted by such things as climate change. We're seeing rising temperatures. It's impacted by natural disasters. We all saw the recent hurricane that hit Eastern Canada. We see extreme flooding that's happening all over the world. Food security is also impacted by armed conflict. We see people are being displaced from their lands where they're traditionally farming. Therefore, they don't have access to food when they're forced to flee their land. And lastly, impacts from pandemics such as COVID, which we have all seen over the past few years. All of this further contributes to inequalities in access to basic resources, such as food. And this is especially true by marginalized populations such as women, youth, Indigenous groups, the LGBTQI community, and persons living with disabilities, for example. Climate change has a huge impact on food security and livelihoods. And I mention this because Kuso is doing a lot of work in this area. Our project in Peru that Pilar and Griselda will talk about later is a great example. And climate change has a huge impact on food security and livelihood, but even more so in rural areas. We're looking at limited agriculture and production of fruits and vegetables, reduced access to water, so lack of irrigation to grow fruits and vegetables, and reduced access to food. As the head of programs for Latin America and the Caribbean with Cuso International for the past 8 years, I've had the opportunity to observe and celebrate the work that our partners and communities are doing to address food security issues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience in Honduras, and Pilar will talk about our experience in Peru. Cuso International in Honduras, for example, is working with rural communities in the dry corridor where there are little or no employment opportunities, and they've also been severely impacted by climate change or natural disasters. I had the opportunity to visit one of the towns where we're working, and I met with the vice mayor, who shared with me that there's a real concern in their town because many of the citizens do not have money to buy food because there's very little economic generating opportunities. In the territory of Olancho, hardest hit by hurricanes Eta and Iota, Cuso International and partners are coordinating to provide business training to communities to start agribusinesses that will produce products and services that will help consumers build resilience, but also help business to access better markets so the business can become more resilient and more profitable. Recognizing the impact of COVID on rural communities, Cuso International is also working with micro and small businesses in the departments of La Paz and Valle to share information with businesses to better understand adaptation options, how to be more resilient to the impacts of climate change. We're also working alongside of local environmental units that are part of municipalities, so they too can better understand food security issues in their communities and better integrate adaptation into their development planning, which is important to conserve resources, to improve productivity, but most importantly, to strengthen community resiliency. Cuso International is also working alongside of marginalized groups, such as persons living with disabilities, to build their knowledge and capacity to better plan for natural disasters. We know that proper planning and prevention can reduce the impact of natural disasters on communities, but more importantly, it can mitigate the repercussions on food security, particularly for vulnerable populations. Through our work with our partners, we place specific focus on the empowerment of women and other vulnerable populations and using a rights-based approach to decision-making, which helps to create synergies among household food security, adaptation, and mitigation, for example. We know that rural communities are severely impacted by food security issues. However, we must recognize that individuals living in urban areas also face challenges. Urban areas have traditionally been seen as having less food insecurity issues than rural areas because there's more of an abundance of food, access to grocery stores, food vendors, restaurants, for example. However, we must recognize that not everybody has equal access to this abundance of food. Urban areas experience inequalities, including reduced access to food, resulting from socioeconomic differences, ethnicity, migratory status, and even city size, for example. I want to touch a little bit on migration. Food insecurity is a key driver of migration. We know lack of access to food, livelihoods, housing, and social networks are common features to migration and all contribute to food insecurity. So for example, in Colombia, Cuso International and our partners are providing training to Venezuelan migrants. We know there's been a huge migration of Venezuelan migrants to Colombia, as well as countries such as Ecuador and Peru. And we are working with the migrant population, providing them with skills training so they're able to access decent employment or strengthen or start their own business. And by having this increased access to economic opportunities, they have increased access to food as well as other basic necessities. The next portion of our discussion of the town hall will focus on our work in Peru, where we are helping urban communities, particularly women such as Griselda, who are living in desert areas to feed themselves. Lastly, Cuso International would like to thank donors such as Global Affairs Canada, the European Union, the World Food Programme, the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and UNHCR, who are all supporting the work of Cuso International and our partners in the area of food security. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Tanya. Things that stood out that, I think are aligned is that you talked about natural disasters. We've, the US as well as Canada, we've had our own natural disasters recently, but I don't always think of food insecurity as one of the outcomes of these natural disasters. So around the whole climate action and migration, that was super interesting. So thank you for sharing that. Now I'd like to bring Pilar into the conversation to talk about the Women United for Food and Environmental Security in Peru. Pilar is going to give us some history, what the community, what the networks are doing, as well as the community kitchens themselves. And I have a couple of slides while Pilar is speaking. So Pilar, over to you.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you, Tandy, for providing that introduction to the importance of projects to address the food insecurity that we are facing right now. I'm going to talk about urban agriculture, which is defined as the agriculture practices that take place in the form of backyards, of community gardens, balcony gardenings, or also the taking care of animals, small animals such as chickens, pigs, or honeybees near the homes. Now, alongside urban agriculture, there is agro ecology, which is a revolutionary approach to agriculture systems that derives from a holistic view of nature, maintaining the existing balance of ecological systems at the core of agroecologically. With the relationship with the plants, the animals, the landscape, and the people value as hugely important in determining the agricultural practices. And I will talk now, having those concepts, about the community kitchens, or the way we call it in Peru, ollas comunes. I really like that name because it's like everybody eating from a community pot, but we call it a community kitchen. This is a network of communal kitchens where neighborhoods, particularly women, share and gather what food they have, whatever they have in their hands, to be cooked for meals and for the entire neighborhood. So assuring that with the community kitchens, no one is hungry, at least they receive 1 full meal a day. The food that is used in these community kitchens comes from local urban gardens, where small farmers grow sustainable and soil-friendly crops and use environmental-friendly fertilizers and pest controls. So these community kitchens in Peru are led by women. The community kitchens meals are vital in Lima as coronavirus, quarantines, and supply chains disruptions. Now high inflation and transportation prices have left millions of people in Lima and Peru in need. To date, more than 2,500 community kitchens, or ollas comunes, have fed close to 250,000 families. And I want to tell you a little bit of history now that we know the ollas comunes, or community kitchens, how Kuso comes to play in this project. It happens that in 2016, Cuso International and other partners in Peru that included the National Agrarian University, La Molina, the Agro Ecological Network, RAE, IPES, SENCA, MOSIC, which is a movement against climate change, Nubes, and other organizations came together and formed what we call La Plataforma de Agricultura Urbana de Lima, or Urban Agriculture Platform in Lima, and presented a project called Feeding Lima from Within. This project objective was to train small gardeners to improve their families' food security and increase their income by developing an agricultural seal that allow them to sell their products in new markets. This project trained nearly 400 urban smallholders and provided the seal, the urban agriculture seal, to 120. Then the pandemic came into our lives and everything changed for the worse, we can say. So there came the opportunity of the projects Mujeres Unidas por la Seguridad Alimentaria y Ambiental, or MUSA, that in Spanish means an inspiration for every artist, muse. And as we call in English, Women United for the Food and Environmental Security. This project is supporting the needs of Peruvians around food. What are the main characteristics of MUSA? The community kitchens food system have organized into networks. Community gardens that were identified during the previous project that I was telling you about came together, and their leadership is influencing policy and creating sustainable change. There is a local law in Lima that promotes community kitchens and recognizes them. Kuso, alongside our partners, are focusing on building the capacity of these grassroots organizations, the gardens, the urban agricultural gardens, and the community kitchens through training and connections to networks. The community kitchen food system provides opportunities for women farmers to advocate and lead in decision-making. And the project is built around advocacy and local policies, helping women farmers access markets and agroecological food productions. Our partners include Technical Committee for Food Security of Metropolitan Lima, the Network of Community Kitchens, the Peruvian Agroecological Consortium, the Urban Agricultural Platform that I already talked to you about in Lima, and organizations of urban and peri-urban farmers. So this would be my explanation of the project. And this project is going to support 1,250 families in food security and environmental security. So thank you, Tina.
No, thank you, Pilar. It's super interesting and important to understand the work that's being done around urban gardens and community kitchens. And I hope you love this satellite aerial view of some of the work that all these women and networks have been doing. And now, as I mentioned, it's my great pleasure to invite Griselda and Pilar to have a conversation and for Griselda to share her personal story. I will stop the presentation at this point. And again, a reminder for those who may have joined late, we have live interpretation. Pilar and Griselda will be speaking in their native language of Spanish. So please select, it's a globe sphere at the bottom of your screen if you're using a computer, the language of your preference. Once again, thank you, and over to you, Pilar and Griselda.
Hola Griselda, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Quisiéramos escuchar la historia, Griselda, de cómo estuviste involucrado, cómo empezaste a participar en las ollas comunes, tu experiencia y qué es lo que esperas del futuro y el futuro tuyo y del proyecto.
Buenos días con todos. Como ella mencionó, mi nombre es Griselda Congachi. Soy madre de 3 hijas mujercitas con mi esposo y vivo en las laderas, ¿no? Laderas le decimos porque son partes altas, son cerros, ¿no? Son prácticamente zonas áridas, como dijo. Bueno, yo me involucro en la olla común a raíz de la pandemia, porque en mi agrupación, como otras agrupaciones, hubo necesidad de alimentarnos. Y sí, también lamentablemente sufrimos de un abandono, de una seguridad alimentaria fija, de una seguridad alimentaria pues al que día a día nosotros podemos asistir o podemos tener la seguridad de que sí vamos a estar alimentándonos día a día. Entonces, esa es nuestra falta, tenemos la inseguridad con todas las palabras dichas. Es por eso que varias mujeres nos hemos juntado y hacemos una olla grande. Sea un segundo, un desayuno, y distribuimos a las gentes más vulnerables. Entre ellos son los niños menores, personas adultos, personas con discapacidad que sí tenemos en nuestras agrupaciones, madres solteras, gestantes, personas también que sufren de tuberculosis, personas que perdieron su trabajo. O también tenemos el caso de que hombres lamentablemente se separan de sus mujeres, se quedan con los hijos. Y son varios casos en los cuales acá en las agrupaciones tenemos esa necesidad. Y hemos tenido bastante dificultad en cuestión de alimentarlos a ellos porque no contamos con los recursos para poder tener los alimentos y cocinarlos. Ha sido grande la lucha porque para comprar cualquier cosa nosotros tenemos que bajar grande distancia, hacer esfuerzo físico, hay veces rogar a los compañeros, hombres, que nos ayuden a cargar las cosas, para transportar el balón de gas, para pedir que nos den agua, porque en nuestra olla no tenemos agua, ¿no? Pedimos a los vecinos que nos den una cierta cantidad y nosotros le pagamos. Es lo mismo con la luz. Yo sé que a veces no creen en lo que les estoy contando, pero sí, todavía hay varias personas que no tenemos agua, desagüe en nuestras casas, no contamos con luz, a veces no contamos con un buen vía de acceso, o sea, en el sentido de una buena escalera, una buena infraestructura en nuestras agrupaciones, ¿no? Todavía vivimos en esos años anteriores que parecen esos viejos esos lugares alejados en los desiertos áridos, así parecemos, ¿no? Pero la realidad es esta, y como seres humanos, y tratamos de sustentarnos, alimentarnos, y es por eso que el proyecto que nos ha brindado la señorita Pilar nos ha ayudado bastante. ¿Por qué? Porque nos está enseñando a capacitarnos y a aprender a reutilizar lo que nosotros estamos botando bastante. En nuestras ollas comunes botamos pues productos orgánicos, desperdiciamos agua residual, agua de lo que nosotros lavamos las verduras. Entonces, eso es lo que ellos nos han enseñado, a que lo reutilicemos, lo saquemos lo más provecho posible a eso, y es por eso que a nosotras nos han enseñado a que nosotras mismas inspiremos a otras mamitas, a otras mujeres, y por qué no a otros hombres, ¿no? También podríamos decir a nuestros propios hijos a que hagan lo mismo, repliquen, y que todo esto sea una armonía entre nosotros y el medio ambiente, ¿no? Tratar de no consumir muchos químicos, y de que nosotros mismas podemos plantar nuestras hortalizas en nuestros huertos. Tenemos un huerto no grande, pero también otras ollas comunes ya están replicando lo mismo, ¿no? En querer sembrar, en querer cosechar lo que uno mismo produce. Y eso hemos visto que sí es realidad, ¿no? Y eso es lo que también esperamos de que el proyecto MUSA siga ampliándose con los apoyos, con los aportes, con las capacitaciones, con la confianza que ustedes nos pueden estar dando para que se haga más realidad y se siga ampliando, no solamente acá, sino que en otros lugares a las cuales yo sé que hay mujeres que sí van a aprender, y ustedes mismos cuando vengan al Perú, ojalá que tengan la oportunidad de venir y visiten San Juan del Lurigancho, puedan mirar todo lo que el medio ambiente está cambiando en nuestra zona, y que también como seres humanos mejoremos también. Y seamos agradecidos con el planeta, ¿no? Porque a las finales estamos viviendo en un lugar que nosotros mismos tenemos que sustentarnos y no destruirnos nosotros mismos, y buscar un equilibrio entre nosotros mismos. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Griselda.
And thank you both. Thank you, Pilar, and thank you, Griselda. We're just about to get to the Q&A section, and I have a surprise guest for you during that section, but I just want to see what you took away from the talks of our three speakers so far. So I'm going to launch a second poll. There we go. And just what stood out for you? And I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that. Okay, so I do want to leave quite a bit of time and share with you who our surprise guest is. So I'm going to end the poll right now, and I'm going to share the results. And so quite a bit of, the terminology of agro-ecological systems was new for me. So definitely a key takeaway. And just thank you, Griselda, again, for sharing your personal story as to your influence as a leader within this project. So I'm going to turn things over and sorry, I need to share my screen again. So as we get to the Q&A, I really wanted to invite, and this was a last minute thing that we decided yesterday. So Pablo Guerrero has more than 15 years of experience working with NGOs, non-governmental organizations, that have contributed to improving the quality of life of small farmers with limited resources in Nicaragua by providing technical assistance in topics such as food production and small garden diversification. Pablo has been a volunteer for Cuso International, a South-South volunteer, since June 2021, working in Peru, supporting the Urban Development Institute, SENCA. And for the last 15 months has provided technical support in composting, small garden, organic pest control, impacting, and reforestation. Pablo has been working with more than 45 families that belong to the program we've been talking about, the Urban Agricultural Network in San Juan. And Pablo has a degree in ecology and natural resources, a certification in public management for development, and higher studies in project formulation and evaluation. So with that, who better to be able to answer some of these technical questions around the project, but the whole panel is here to answer your questions, and I see there's 4 in the chat already, so I'm going to stop sharing Pablo's bio. Yeah, sorry, Pablo, if you want to just say a quick hello, please go ahead.
Hola, muchísimas gracias por la oportunidad, y bueno, acá desde San Juan del Lurigancho, acompañado con la señora Griselda, pues estamos a su disposición a cualquier pregunta que tengan para responder.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm going to pull up the Q&A. We did get one question in advance. It's It's a little technical in my mind, but it's open for any of you to respond to. It's around the agroecological practices. What do they teach us about environmental ethics and climate change? And so I'll turn that over to any one of you. Ecological practices as it relates to environmental ethics and climate change.
Tal vez Pablo, ¿quieres responder a la pregunta? Como el técnico.
Sí, muchísimas gracias. Bien, la oportunidad que nosotros tenemos como voluntarios de Kuso, trabajando en conjunto con el Instituto de Desarrollo Urbano SENCA, es brindarle asistencia técnica y capacitación a las familias para que puedan reutilizar insumos, lo decía la señora Griselda, utilizar algunos desperdicios de cocinas que son de origen orgánicos, algunos productos que están ahí y se pueden reutilizar para elaborar abonos. Otra de las actividades que nosotros hacemos es poder brindarles asesoría en técnicas nuevas para poder hacer viveros, para poder hacer cultivos adecuados y que puedan diversificar sus pequeños huertos y tengan acceso a ese alimento. Como Kuso y SENCA estamos trabajando también en áreas de recuperación de espacios verdes o de espacios comunitarios en reforestación. Esto ayuda a que las familias puedan tener espacios de esparcimiento y que también ayuden al medio ambiente donde estamos diciendo. Gracias.
Thank you, Pablo. There's quite a few questions in here. One we are going to get to, so I'm going to skip and ask this question. So what are the economic benefits of these community pots for the women and for the women who are involved? Is it voluntary or is it an income generating activity? So either Pilar, or Griselda, or Tanya, I think you know the answer to that.
Hola, voy a dejar que responda Griselda, pero voy a responder solamente a una parte de la pregunta. Es voluntario. Estas mujeres lo hacen sin recibir ningún ingreso económico a cambio. Griselda, voy a dejar que respondas la otra parte de la pregunta, por favor.
Bueno, como dijo la señorita Pilar, nosotros no cobramos, nosotros no pedimos nada a cambio, simplemente cuando ellos nos dicen, ay, ¿sabes qué? Tal día tenemos que cocinar, cocinamos tal día, nos organizamos, ¿qué día cocinas tú? ¿Qué días compras tú? Entonces tratamos de distribuir y ahora que existe el WhatsApp, decimos, ¿sabes qué, señores? Bajen a recoger su menú que ya está listo, servirles, lavar la soya, tratar de atenderlos. Y el beneficio es que nos llevamos, aunque sea un plato de comida ese día, ¿no? Tratar de ayudar a esas familias, porque como les vuelvo a mencionar, hay muchas familias que pueden comer aunque sea pancito con plátano o banana, pero eso no es un buen alimento, ¿no? No es un buen alimento, no es un alimento balanceado como para combatir con la tuberculosis, la anemia. Entonces, nosotros como olla común tratamos de hacer lo más concentrado posible para poder ayudar y combatir a esas enfermedades, ¿no? Mayormente es voluntario la ayuda que hacemos. Gracias.
Thank you, Griselda. We have a question around kind of the capital. So where does the capital come from to start these community kitchens and community pots? And how do these community kitchens and pots economically serve the women who are involved in them? So I think it's a bit similar. They're not income stimulating, but maybe the first part can be answered around where does the capital come from?
In the case of the MUSA project, well, the funds come from the Canadian government, Global Affairs Canada. The MUSA project is one of the impact funds projects that are implemented under the SHARE program. But also, we receive a lot of support from private donors. And this is a great opportunity for the private donors that support this project, the MUSA project, to see how important is are there contributions to support women and families like Griselda's, for example? So there are many community kitchens that are not receiving the support. There are still a lot of things that we can do. And we are only able to develop or implement these projects with the support of those private donors of Cuso International and with the support of volunteers like Pablo, for example, and the organizations that we work together to implement this project.
Thank you, Pilar. So everybody's going to hear me, but are you seeing the question that's asked in Spanish by any chance? Are you able to read that one? By Carlos.
Yeah.
Yep. Pilar, did you want to read it out?
Yeah, I can read it. It says, tengo la impresión que la gerencia de las ollas comunes es mayoritariamente de mujeres. ¿Y cuál es el rol de los hombres de dichas comunidades en esta actividad? Y luego pregunta, ¿por qué no promover la masculinidad positiva? So I'll ask Griselda for the first part. Griselda, si nos podría ayudar a responder cuál es el rol de los hombres y por qué las mujeres son las que están más activas en las ollas comunes.
Como son varias ollas comunes, no solamente en San Juan del Lurigancho, son otros distritos. Por ollas son representantes, pero también no se vayan a equivocar porque hay hombres representantes de ollas comunes, ¿no? Entonces acá no estamos diferenciando si es hombre o mujer, sino que se ve la voluntad que uno tiene de servir. Si un hombre viene a nuestra olla, a otras ollas, dice, ¿sabes qué, vecino, vecina, puedo cocinar o apoyarte? Perfecto. ¿Quién más no quisiera una mujer que apoyen en la cocina? Porque son ollas grandes a las cuales nosotros tenemos que cargar. Entre 2, 3 tenemos que bajarlo. Entonces, si fuera un hombre, sería más fácil, más ágil el trabajo también, ¿no? Y aparte, cargar también las cosas del mercado, sería más beneficioso si caballeros se juntan a nosotros. En ese sentido, nosotros no cerramos nada a nadie las puertas y ¿por qué no? También no es que nosotros estemos promoviendo la ociosidad, también hay adolescentes que nos pueden enseñar. ¿Para qué? En el sentido de que una persona tiene que crecer ya responsabilizándose en el futuro. Por ejemplo, algo chiquitito. En mi caso, pues cuando yo tenía mi primera hija, yo pensaba en el momento. Yo nunca pensé que mi hijo iba a crecer, que tenía que guardar económicamente para poderle hacerle estudiar, ¿no? Pero ahora que tengo 2 hijas más, yo sé que primero, tú, al tener una hija, tú tienes que enseñarle qué es lo que le vas a dar en el futuro. Entonces, eso también es enseñarle a ser responsable como ser humano, no solamente con nuestros alimentos, sino con todo alrededor de nosotros que estamos viviendo. Gracias.
Thank you, Griselda and Pilar. I'm not sure what the question's asking, but it does have the reference of educational systems. So my assumption, and please add to the question if I have this wrong, but I think you're asking about the educational system and if this is taught, any of these practices are taught within the educational system. I don't know if that's a question we can answer. Is agricultural or eco-agro something that people are learning in school?
No, de hecho no está incluido dentro del sistema educativo y por eso yo les mencionaba el primer proyecto que realizamos, ¿se acuerdan? En el que les decía que fue antes de la pandemia, que se llamaba Feeding, I'm speaking Spanish, I'm sorry. I will continue in Spanish, actually. Estaba hablando del proyecto Alimentando Lima desde adentro. Este primer proyecto que vino antes del proyecto MUSA sirvió para capacitar a muchos y muchas de las agricultoras que ahora son parte del proyecto MUSA y los capacitó en cómo implementar huertos agroecológicos en sus patios, en sus comunidades. Y también sirvió para desarrollar este sello de agricultura urbana. Entonces, es algo que no se enseña en las instituciones educativas, pero bueno, Kuso, junto con la plataforma de agricultura urbana, implementaron este proyecto que ha servido muchísimo para pequeños y pequeñas agricultoras en Lima urbana, que tienen muchísimos retos. Bueno, quiero mencionar que Lima está ubicada en un desierto, es la segunda ciudad más grande ubicada en un desierto después del Cairo, y tenemos muchos retos. Griselda mencionaba, por ejemplo, que ella no tiene agua corriente, agua potable en su casa. Y para muchos de nosotros esto puede ser como, ¿cómo está pasando esto en una ciudad como Lima en el año 2022? Pero es la realidad y la hemos visto, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, me salió un poco de la pregunta, pero básicamente no está incluido en el sistema educativo.
Thank you, Pilar. Tanya, I think your hand is up.
Ya, solamente quiero añadir una cosa. Cuando yo estaba visitando los jardines urbanos y estaba hablando con las mujeres y los miembros, ¿no?, del huerto, que hay la posibilidad de traer como niños y niños de las escuelas, ¿no? Entonces, me imagino que en las casas Griselda, otras mujeres están hablando de los huertos, de las cocinas comunitarias, pero también muchos de ellos están trayendo niños y niños para aprender, ¿no?, cómo es plantear semillas, o cómo es, cuál es la producción de vegetales en el huerto. Entonces creo que no es un sistema educativo muy formal, es informal, pero creo que es importante también de decir que las mujeres y otros miembros de la comunidad están compartiendo esa información con sus niños y niñas.
Thank you, Tanya. So again, we have experts. We have Pablo and Griselda. We've answered all of the 7 questions that were in, and I'll just take the opportunity to acknowledge those who've made comments about the chat. I apologize. Not sure exactly what happened, but we were having a bit of technical difficulties with the presentation earlier, so some things might have got moved around. You're welcome to put any comments or feedback in the Q&A if you would like to correspond with us directly. And I'll just leave the questions open for about another 30 seconds before we get into some closing remarks. So Pablo's here, who's an expert in his field, and we have Griselda, a community member working within this project. Do you have, this is a rare opportunity. Oh, here's one. Okay, perfect. Oh, no, it's a comment. You're welcome. Comment saying thank you. Don't know when this is going to come again. So, okay. With that, I'm going to restart. If you have here's a question here, I think. Oh, they're comments now because the chat's not open. Okay, I'll look at those later. Thank you very much. I'm closing this out and I'm just going to share the screen again. We do have a bit of time. If you do have questions, I'll be keeping an eye out on that. But we've been talking the last hour and we're reflecting on kind of food insecurity and the crisis in Lima. Maybe Pilar, I can invite you to share with us some context of what's next and the project investment needs, both from a public and private lens, if you wanted to share some of that with us.
Sí, ¿qué viene después? Bueno, definitivamente todavía tenemos un poco más de un año para implementar este proyecto MUSA, que pretende fortalecer las ollas comunes y los huertos urbanos. Este proyecto también tiene un componente comercial, emprendedor, y lo que queremos hacer es que estas mujeres puedan generar ingresos a través del excedente de los productos de los huertos urbanos y que puedan también poder procesar los alimentos, es decir, que no solamente puedan vender los alimentos frescos del huerto, pero sino también sacarle más valor, agregarle valor, por ejemplo, haciendo infusiones o haciendo jaleas o compotas o procesando estos alimentos para que puedan durar más tiempo y que puedan tener más valor en el mercado. Otra de las cosas que vienen también, este proyecto es muy importante porque estamos coordinando con la Municipalidad de Lima. La Municipalidad de Lima está apoyando estos esfuerzos y eso involucra al gobierno local. Y hay una ordenanza que ha sido aprobada de agricultura urbana en Lima, entonces eso da mucha esperanza para la sostenibilidad de este proyecto. Otra cosa que quisiera decir es que, bueno, este proyecto, mientras tanto, necesita el apoyo todavía de los donantes. Entonces, mientras puedan apoyar, estaremos muy agradecidos, no solamente Kuso, sino familias como las de Griselda, que son muchísimas que se están beneficiando, para que sus vidas puedan cambiar. Griselda hablaba de la anemia. En Perú hay un gran índice de anemia en niños menores de 5 años. Y eso, pues, es un problema de salud pública, pero también es un problema de desarrollo, porque no permite que estos niños puedan estudiar con la misma capacidad de un niño que está bien alimentado. Entonces, quiero que piensen en esas cosas y nosotros igual estaremos pensando en los próximos pasos de este proyecto, en cómo fortalecerlo y fortalecer a familias como las de Griselda y organizaciones como las ollas comunes y de agricultores y agricultoras urbanos.
Thank you, Pilar. And just before moving on to closing remarks from the others, I was checking the Q&A board. So I think, again, this is an opportunity maybe for Pablo and Griselda. Griselda, the question was to you. What are some of your biggest challenges within the Common Pots program? And maybe Pablo, how many families are fed, or however you wish to kind of divide those two questions up. There are other questions and we'll be covering those, but those are two that I wanted to get over to both of you. The biggest challenges within the Common Pots community kitchens, as well as the number of people that are being fed.
Bueno, el reto más dificultoso que hasta ahora tenemos es recibir o poder tener acceso a los alimentos que nos puedan nutrir, ¿no? Como les digo, uno puede cocinar fideos, pero si no le echas algo cárnico o alguna verdura que se balancee, es como si estuvieras comiendo agua, es como si estuvieras comiendo solamente pan solo, ¿no? Y eso no alimenta. Esa es la gran lucha de que el gobierno o el Estado nos dé nos den alimentos de calidad, nos den alimentos que sí se puede cocinar, ¿no? Y fuera de eso también es el acceso al agua, al desagüe. Nosotros prácticamente el agua que utilizamos la tenemos que regar o la tenemos que verter en la calle porque no tenemos desagüe. Otro reto es la vía de acceso, es trasladarte al mercado hacia nuestras ollas. El tramo es largo y si no tenemos solvencia económica, pues como una moto o algo, un transporte particular no se puede, ¿no? Esos son los retos mayormente, ¿no? Y nosotros alimentamos, pues, en familias, será pues 35 familias, que equivale a 120 raciones, 80 raciones, 90 raciones, dependiendo también cuál es la necesidad de día a día en nuestras ollas. Esos son fuera de las personas vulnerables, que son personas adultos mayores, ¿no? Solamente con ellos nos estamos concentrando mayormente. Personas con discapacidad, niños y adultos mayores. Eso sería todo. Gracias.
Thank you both, Griselda and Pablo. And so maybe just keeping an eye on the time. I know, Tanya, you were recently in Peru, and just wondering if there's any reflections or insights that you would like to leave our Canadian audience with.
Sure. I mean, I think the best part of my job is that I have the opportunity to visit the communities that we work. I spent time in Lima last April, I believe, and I had the opportunity to visit the urban gardens as well as some of our community kitchens, including the community kitchen that Griselda is part of. Hola, Griselda, un placer verte de nuevo y ojalá que nos vemos de nuevo. And it was a great experience. And when Griselda talks about, you know, carrying these pots and supplies, they really live in communities, very steep steps. It's hot. I know it's not an easy job. It was really gracious of Griselda, who invited us to one of the community kitchens. We tried her food, we had lunch, it was delicious. And so I was just really inspired by the work of Griselda and other women in the community, because they are doing this with their own resources. They're doing this on their free time while they're raising children and working and taking care of their family and doing, you know, a number of other things. And really, they do this because they want to ensure that their families and their community members have access to safe and nutritious food. So there's the food security. It's women like Griselda who are the drivers of improving food security in their communities. As I was there, and I remember speaking to Pilar, and I said, can you imagine what we could do with $500, with $1,000? You could open up another kitchen, you could provide training, you can buy food supplies, you can do a number of different things, you know, thinking about how we can increase production for fruits and vegetables in the gardens, opening up additional community kitchen. It just with a little amount, you can achieve a lot in these different communities. So to me, that was super inspiring, the work, but hey, thinking, you know, what can we do together to make this grow and feed more people? Lastly, I just want to thank our individual donors. I know there's a lot of people who are currently supporting Cuso International and our programs globally, including Peru, but I also would invite others who are attending the town hall today to visit Cuso's International website, learn more about how you can become a donor, but also how you can support our work in food security and other areas. So that's my sort of closing remark. Again, muchas gracias, Griselda y Pablo. También conozco a Pablo y muchas gracias por todo.
Thank you, Tanya. And now over to Pablo and Griselda each. You have a minute if you would like to share some reflections or any thoughts and wishes and dreams for the future of your country, your program, and more so your community and your family. So over to you for closing remarks.
Bueno, como ustedes saben antiguamente antes de que haya toda esta tecnología, de donde nosotros hacíamos nuestros alimentos, nosotros mismos los cultivamos. Entonces, yo creo que volver a nuestra raíz es vivir en armonía con el medio ambiente, ¿no? Con el planeta mismo. Entonces, yo quisiera eso, que volvamos a nuestras raíces, que todo se equilibre y que todo sea como cualquier ser humano, que haya paz, tranquilidad, equilibrio y buena alimentación, ¿no? Y gracias por el aporte de ustedes y por su apoyo también, seguir esperando más apoyo de ustedes, seguir esperando, inspirando a muchas mujeres que con las capacitaciones sigamos mejorando también. Eso nomás sería gracias. No sé si
Gracias, señora Griselda. No, bueno, agradecer la oportunidad también de poder expresarnos y igual, ¿no? Que todo apoyo es bienvenido. Cada granito de arena que nosotros estemos poniendo en pro de mejorar la calidad de vida en las familias va a ser muy importante porque con nuestro apoyo, cuando trabajamos en un huerto comunitario, cuando trabajamos en un huerto familiar, estamos brindando no solamente tecnología, no solamente alguna técnica, pero también estamos brindando alimentos y estamos enseñando a poder producir. Y yo creo que es lo más importante, es que cualquier apoyo es bienvenido y pues muchísimas gracias por la oportunidad.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for spending the hour with us discussing community kitchens and how it's really serving local communities in Lima, Peru. We hope you found the agroecological approach to food systems and definitely how it's providing opportunities for women farmers and women's networks inspiring. I invite you to stay connected through our Catalyst magazine and our social media platforms. For questions I didn't get to, I think we're up to 17. I think I got through to 15. There might be 2 there that I didn't get to. I'll definitely get back to you today with a response to those personally. And for those of you interested in volunteering, please visit our placement page on our website. There's a list of opportunities there. And you can also sign up for e-alerts, and that will give you access to future placements automatically. I want to recognize and thank Kuso International is grateful and acknowledges the financial support of the Government of Canada through Global Affairs Canada, as well as our donors and supporters. I would also like to recognize Gay Lee for their contributions to this program, as well as Brasa Peruvian Kitchens for their financial contributions to the Women United for Food and Environmental Security project. Thank you for the work and the investment and the belief in the work that we're doing at Cuso International. And I would like to thank you, all of you on the line, all of you who've registered, in the many ways that you support Cuso International. If you would like to help women farmers and women's networks feed Lima's most vulnerable, please consider making a donation today. We cannot do this work without you. Thank you for joining today. Please stay safe and in solidarity. Bye for